Tipping Spears with Hannah Becker. Today's conversation promises to be an insightful one with a remarkable guest. Whether you're joining us for the first time or you're a regular listener, we're so glad you're here. Our goal is to bring you closer to the innovative leaders and thinkers shaping our future. And today, we're thrilled to welcome Julie Eshelman. Julie is the founder, CEO, and president of Building Military Families Network, where she took her struggles and lack of support in family building and created a nonprofit organization to fill the gap for military and veteran families. She uses her infertility and pregnancy loss journey to help others realize that they are not alone and advocate for insurance coverage and care for military and veteran families. Julie believes in breaking the chains of shame and embarrassment that these topics carry and instead empowering others to share their journeys and advocate for the next generation. In 2022, she was named AFI's Fort Leavenworth Spouse of the Year for her awareness, advocacy, and leadership in infertility and military family building. She co-chaired Resolve's Federal Advocacy Day in 24 to 25, which is the largest grassroots advocacy effort surrounding family building issues, with hundreds of advocates from across the country participating every year. Then in 2025, Julie received Resolve's Risa A. Levine's Advocacy Legacy Award for her mentorship and advocacy for military family building. Well, welcome to Tipping Spears, Julie.
Thank you so much for having me, Hannah.
So can you start us off today with telling us where your story begins?
So once upon a time, I met my husband when we were at college. No idea at first that he was in the ROTC program. And so that quite literally kickstarted, this military family, military spouse journey, right from the beginning of our relationship. And we've been together ever since. We were married in 2015 and decided that we wanted to wait a year before trying to build our family, as society seems to have ingrained in a lot of people's minds that they need a year to enjoy marriage first. And so then we began trying to build our family, and about 6 months in, started to wonder whether or not there was a problem because we weren't getting pregnant. Um, I feel like high school sex ed class made us all believe that getting pregnant was so easy.
Mm.
And so we didn't really understand like why we couldn't. And that led us to a 9 year family building journey with unexplained infertility and recurrent pregnancy loss. Um, we have sought care at fertility clinics in 4 different states. We have done it all. We've done IUI, we've done IVF.
Mhm.
We do have our miracle baby. She's now 4, and quite sassy. But we've also experienced a lot of heartbreak along the way, with 4 losses and one that nearly killed me.
So you went through all of this. Um, what inspired you to kind of take that experience and found, building military families network? Was there, kind of a specific experience, or were you, kind of fed up with zero support on this, very isolating journey, that prompted you to start, a nonprofit organization?
Yeah, I mean, I was definitely fed up, and frustrated. A lot of people, when you're going through infertility and pregnancy loss, you often feel very alone.
Mhm.
You don't feel like you want to necessarily talk about it. I definitely didn't the first few years that we were experiencing that. We kept it very close to us.
Mhm.
We didn't really tell a whole lot of people that we were struggling or that we had experienced the losses. Um, and so, not talking about it with my friends and family, I kept searching for places to get, questions asked, to find support, to find community. And I was really frustrated with what I was finding because there really wasn't anything. And when I would find something, it was usually civilian based. And so they didn't
Mhm.
understand the complexities of what military life is really like and how deployments and constantly relocating impact this journey. in ways that a lot of people in the civilian side of things just really can't relate to
Mhm,
or understand.
mhm,
And so that frustration, I kept waiting for somebody else to do it because I was like,
mhm,
oh, I'm happy. I've been involved in a couple of different military organizations over the years as a volunteer, and I've worked in nonprofit world most of my adult life. It's exhausting to
mhm,
run a nonprofit. So really didn't want to start one.
mhm,
But the years just kept going, I finally said enough is enough. This community deserves to have its own nonprofit focused on supporting these
mhm,
issues. And so in 2023, I founded Building Military Families Network, to be that resource, to
mhm.
be that place to get information in a safe place and a place to find community and support.
Yeah, well, I'm so glad you founded it. I think your organization was the first time I ever found any resources on this that was tailored to military families. I feel like there were always, within military life, there were the folks that, they got pregnant 2 hours after homecoming
Yeah,
with triplets, like,
right, right.
and then there was this subset where it was very much not the case. And to
Mhm.
your point, wasn't discussed. There was no hub. Um, Military healthcare didn't discuss it. The VA provided absolutely nothing. There was just nothing. And so I remember finding your organization like, wow, I'm so glad, it is a very isolating experience. And so you think, oh, it's only me. It's
Mhm.
only, and so I think, I know there's tons of people, that really appreciate you stepping up to the plate because I know starting a nonprofit is a huge lift. And
Yes.
especially when it's something that's very, personal to you, which on one hand,
Mhm.
you get all this inspiration from that and you have the insights, but it's also very taxing.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely been very emotional because
Yeah.
even as I was founding Building Military Families Network, my husband and I were still trying to build our family. And so we were simultaneously taking this big leap, and this big commitment to start this
Mhm.
organization, but we were still, hoping to complete our family,
Mhm.
um, which, we ended up not being successful and, experienced that fourth loss, um, and have subsequently stepped away from building our family,
Mhm.
for a variety of reasons. But um, it's all for the same goal,
Mhm.
right? The advocacy work that I've done over the last 7 years, building this organization and going through my own experiences has really just set me into this place of, what I was meant to do.
Mhm.
And it's providing that support for this community, using my story and my experiences to hopefully change things for the next generation.
So when you first started, the organization, can you tell us what the early days, look like? In case someone's never started, a nonprofit.
Yeah, I feel like you really learn a lot about yourself. Um, because that imposter syndrome, um, that a lot of people like to talk about, they don't always want to admit that they're experiencing it,
Mhm.
um, was very prevalent in those early days. I definitely was like, what am I doing?
Mhm.
Because I knew there was a need. I knew that this was something that our community needed, and I didn't want to screw it up.
Mhm.
So that definitely like weighed on me very heavily. Um, and it was reaching out and finding people that I could ask questions of that could mentor me, finding resources and things that could teach me the things that I didn't know. Because, like I said before, I've had a variety of different roles in a variety of different types of nonprofits over the last 15 years or so.
Mhm.
And so I know a lot about the nonprofit space. I have a lot of experiences in a lot of different places, but I was never the person. And so being like the person and, having the big idea and, how to turn that into something was intimidating. I did feel like an imposter, but I always came back to, well, who am I helping? I am building what I wish would have been there for me. And so that motivates me. And so everybody, anybody that's listening that is thinking about building a nonprofit, you have to remember your why, and that helps get over all of the other stuff. So, your why is your mission. There can be additional whys, outside of your organizational mission, but, as long as everything you're doing has the heart of the mission in mind, you're going to be okay. Everything will fall into place. I'm not saying that there's not some bumpy spots along the way. Um, but yeah, I hope that answers your question.
And that's great insight, Julie. So can you tell us, I know, starting a nonprofit, not easy, huge task, and the buck stops with you as the one with this vision here. So what are some of the biggest challenges that you faced, and then how did you overcome them? Did you find, are there any specific helpful resources or strategies that you found that kind of helped you, when you're running a little low on the inspiration?
Yeah, I think one of like our biggest challenges, and it's been a challenge that we've had since day one and that we're still experiencing, is, we're a newer nonprofit, at
Mhm,
least in the MSO VSO space. So we don't have a lot of funding.
mhm,
And because we don't have a lot of funding, we don't have any paid staff.
mhm.
And so we are all volunteer led. And, as most people know, the military community is a little tapped out on the volunteering.
Yeah.
And, I think as more time um, goes by, more and more of our military community is feeling less and less like volunteering.
Mhm,
They're tired of being voluntold. And
mhm,
so that's been one of our biggest challenges is finding the people to help us to grow the organization, to reach the people that need our organization. Um, and I don't know that we've really found the answer
mhm,
to that problem. But we do put every dollar that we have to very good use. It all goes back into supporting our programs. And the more that we are getting our name out there, the more people are applying, and
mhm,
that is helping us.
mhm,
And so I think, one of the things that we've really focused on the last year or so is building relationships in the community and being at some of those different conferences and things like that to get
mhm,
that word out there. And that's starting to work.
mhm,
People are starting to recognize, us as an organization, what we do, our mission, and things like that. And so some of those other things that we've been struggling with are starting to get better. Um, no secret sauce just yet that we found. But I know that a lot of other nonprofit organizations can also kind of relate to that challenge. We don't want to take advantage of the military community,
mhm.
um, but we're also hoping that we'll find the right volunteers that do want to give back, that aren't experiencing that burnout, and things like that.
Yeah. You provided a great description of how, organizational growth, um, how it can kind of wax and wane. You hit new challenges and you
Mhm.
overcome those. And then there's, new challenges on the other side of that mountain.
Yes.
So growing pains.
Yes, growing pains. We often use that term in our organization for sure. And we expect to have growing pains always, because if
Yeah,
we don't have growing pains, then we're not growing.
that's true. That's a good way to put it. So, in case folks, aren't aware, can you tell us how the military experience, how the lifestyle, the moving, deployments, insurance, like not covering certain things that need to be covered at certain times, make the family building process uniquely difficult when compared to civilians going through the same stuff?
Yeah, I mean, so, even if, or when you're first starting, to build your family, you're first trying
Mhm,
to, you're trying to conceive. Um, for military families, sometimes even that faces challenges, whether or not you have any known fertility challenges.
mhm,
Our service members are deployed.
mhm,
My husband's in the Army Reserve, and so he's got drill weekends, his
mhm,
annual training,
mhm,
those kinds of things where they're gone unexpectedly, TDYs, now that he's in the AGR program.
mhm,
Um, for there was like a good 9 month period when we were first starting
mhm,
to build our family or trying to build our family, where my husband, I kid you not, was TDY every time I was in the fertile window. You
mhm.
can't get pregnant if you're not together to
Together.
do the things that need to be done. Like, so that, and I'm not saying that, civilian couples don't face challenges like that where, one spouse travels for work, yeah, those exist. But then for military families, you add, you know, deployments.
Mhm,
You add, maybe geobaching for a
mhm,
year or two overseas or across the country.
mhm,
And that becomes a financial burden to try and be together. Then, you add like, oh, okay, maybe, I think I might have PCOS. Or, you're worried about one spouse or partner's fertility over the other. And then it's, oh, well, suddenly you get short notice PCS orders. And so
mhm,
now you're moving. And then we all know how long it takes to establish care when you move. And so when you need referrals, that just takes like you're starting to see like there's so many different barriers and we haven't even gotten to a diagnosis yet.
mhm,
And so when you get to that point, you might be PCSing again. Like,
mhm,
and then you're starting the whole process over and over and over again. And so, and that's, I think, one of the things that a lot of our, civilian partner
mhm,
organizations, and civilian advocates don't necessarily even
mhm,
understand about family building within the military is there's already all of these barriers before you even have a diagnosis that impact the whole community if they're
mhm,
choosing to build their family.
mhm,
Then you add the diagnosis and then you get into, okay, well, TRICARE only covers diagnostics
mhm,
and medicated cycles. When you get into needing assisted reproductive technologies like IUI and IVF, those aren't covered
mhm,
unless the service member has a serious injury or illness that has impacted their fertility.
mhm.
And even that is still really hard to prove and document. So there's a lot there. And that's just, your typical heterosexual couples.
Mhm,
Our, LGBTQ plus community also faces additional barriers. Single service members and
mhm,
veterans face challenges if they want to build their family and added expenses. And
mhm,
so there's a lot of things, especially from the military family side or
mhm,
lifestyle side, that
mhm.
impact the journey, whether or not there's a diagnosis there.
Yeah. That's a great description. I think, military life, at least our experience with it, was completely inflexible timelines. So the
Yep.
military gives my husband 3 weeks notice of a longer than a year deployment to a war zone. That's just what happens. There's
Mhm.
no like, that wasn't on the schedule. It's irrelevant what we think about it or how that works for our life. And then the other thing is kind of the biology of that's a totally inflexible timeline too. And
Mhm.
you've got these two timelines and windows,
Yeah.
um, that, when a 20-year war took up the time that things needed to happen, I mean, there's no redo, there's no undo, there's no, well, let me revisit this now. And I feel like that was something that civilians just did not have. I mean, I had friends who did IVF. If their partner was traveling, it's like, well, they can transfer to a new job that has a different role. Not the case in the
Mhm.
military, especially
Right.
in a time of war. So I think that's something that just you did a great description of it. There's so many variables that are
Oh
so
yeah.
unique to military life, and that just kind of amplifies I think the criticalness of an
Mhm.
organization like your nonprofit, because it was not being acknowledged, it was not being addressed, and it was just, okay, we're going to create an impossible scenario for y'all, and the consequences are yours. That was how it was presented for a long
And
time.
And that was a big part of why last year we launched our military family building survey,
Hmm.
and it's currently open again this year, was because we really wanted to gather those experiences from the full military community on the impacts of family building, because we know that it's not just those that have infertility that are
Hmm.
experiencing these challenges, because you know it's kind of hard to time things when, you're geobatching or there's a
Hmm.
deployment or, insert whatever
Yeah.
that's getting in your way. Or maybe you're just choosing to wait until your 8 years are done and then
Yeah.
you're going to build your family. But you don't realize that your fertility has already started to
Hmm.
decrease.
Hmm.
Each year you get older, things decrease a little bit. And so there's also just that lack of understanding, and people are choosing to delay.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, there's just so many different things from the military experience and the military lifestyle
Hmm.
that impact family building, whether or not you're experiencing infertility.
So one of the things that really burns me up was when I go to civilian healthcare providers, and they assume, they're like, well, you got military insurance. That
Mhm.
covers everything. So you don't have to worry about this. And then I know, Julie, it does not.
Mhm.
And so, especially in this area. So can you tell us what are some of the biggest misconceptions that you hear
Mhm.
about, family building challenges specific to the military and veteran community? Um, I know you're, ears to the ground on like what everyone else is kind of encountering, but that was one thing that just really irked me, and I keep encountering it. They just assume it's like, well, military insurance is going to cover everything. And it's like, yeah, I wish. So,
For a lot of other medical conditions
mhm,
and things, that is so true.
mhm,
Like, I broke my ankle in May.
yeah,
I didn't have to worry about whether the ambulance ride was going to be covered, the
yep,
emergency room visit, the surgery, the physical
mhm,
therapy. I didn't worry about any of that. Now, did we have to worry about some billing issues and things like that?
yeah,
Of course, it's insurance. I don't think that changes whether
yeah,
it's military insurance or, civilian insurance. Um, but when it comes to assisted reproductive technologies like IUI and IVF, they are not. I
mhm,
think one of the biggest misconceptions, and we have people that I probably get an email at least once a month, if not every other week, somebody saying like, "Hey, I live in a state where there's like mandated insurance. Why isn't TRICARE covering
mhm,
this?" And so that's one of the biggest misconceptions, is that, there are several states. I believe it's up to, don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure it's up to like 22.
mhm,
I don't follow it super closely,
yeah,
um, because for most military families, it doesn't matter.
mhm,
And let me explain why it doesn't matter. So the way state mandated insurance works is it's for healthcare plans within those states. So companies and employers based in Illinois, for example. When we were moving from Arizona to Illinois, I got really, really excited because we were going to a IVF mandated state. And I was like, oh man,
mhm,
if we need IVF, we're going to get this covered. I was naive. I hadn't really started the advocacy side of
mhm,
my journey at that point. And I learned very quickly that it's for those state employers, because TRICARE is a federal insurance policy for a federal employer. They don't have to follow those state mandates. And it takes an act of federal legislation,
mhm.
that would mandate coverage nationwide, or Congress passing expansions to TRICARE coverage. which is what we saw at the beginning of December here with the NDAA and the IVF coverage provision being pulled. So that is what would have granted the military TRICARE beneficiaries expanded healthcare to include IVF coverage. That didn't wasn't a policy for the VA. And so, some of those nuances, we can get into or we can kind of table for another discussion. But for the most part, for our military and veterans, expanding coverage either is going to require Congress to do something specific for military and veteran families or a nationwide federal mandate.
Can you tell us kind of what those key gaps are and then kind of how your organization is engaging to address those gaps with TRICARE and VA coverage?
Yeah, so, a big part of what we do, is we help to educate. So we're helping to educate not only our military and veteran families on what their options are,
Mhm,
but we're also working to educate the public and policymakers, decision makers, of the impacts of, lack of coverage, what family building support um, lacks,
mhm,
and what can be done. Um, Starting in January last year, members of Congress had their own insurance policy expanded to include IVF coverage. And so the last year, we were really pushing, our service members and their families deserve the same level of healthcare coverage that members of Congress have.
mhm,
Um, I personally believe that service members deserve better healthcare coverage than members of
mhm,
Congress receive. Just my opinion there. You're shaking your head. So I think you agree there. And so, that's why our survey,
mhm,
is so important. That data that we're gathering, that we gathered last year and that we're, gathering this year helps us demonstrate to, Congress, to their staffers, to other policy decision makers that this is important to our community, that
mhm,
it's needed. Some of the research we did last year shows that um, infertility is experienced by more than, sorry, how do I want to say this? So, worldwide, infertility impacts 1 in 6 people.
mhm,
Our survey data from last year showed that over 70% of our community was experiencing infertility. So that is more than 4 times that world
mhm,
average of 1 in 6. Why is infertility more common? I don't know. We
mhm,
would like Congress to help us figure that out. But that's
mhm,
also why we've added some new questions to our survey this year. Our survey is a lot more in depth this year than it was with our initial inaugural survey. And that's because we learned a lot
mhm,
from what people told us. And that insurance coverage is the number one thing that we heard. We knew from our own personal experiences hey, that's what people want, that's what people need. And we had people tell us that. And so
mhm,
Congress is really starting to listen. And so
mhm,
that education piece that we do has really helped
mhm,
because the IVF provision that was in the NDAA's House and Senate versions that passed before the final conference bill had bipartisan support,
mhm,
meaning both Republicans and Democrats supported this issue, saw this as a problem, saw that our service members and their families deserved this. We won't discuss why it didn't get included, but it didn't get included. And so, we're hopeful that people are starting to understand. And just so people listening understand the life cycle of a bill in Congress from introduction to passage is generally about 7 years. This was only year 2 of it being in the NDAA.
mhm,
They've tried other routes and avenues over the last 7 years that I've been involved. And
mhm,
so we're seeing progress,
mhm.
even if it doesn't feel like it. So I think I went on like a really squirrel tangent there. So I'm sorry, Hannah.
No, that's great, Julie. You hit the nail on the head with folks. I think a lot of people don't realize how long it typically takes to get something
Yes.
turned into law. And y'all did get this farther than it's gotten before, with more support than it's gotten before.
Hmm.
I know, when I saw that it wasn't included in the final NDAA, was very sad. However, it was really encouraging to me that it made it that far.
Hmm.
Years ago, I worked on with the widow's tax repeal, which I came in on the tail end of that, and that was for surviving spouses in our military community. And it was over 20 years of
Hmm.
advocating, and the spouses who had started that, many of them weren't even around for it to be passed. But it was because of that continued momentum and that continued advocacy that, my generation of surviving spouses isn't facing financial hardship with widow's tax, which was
Yeah.
unbelievably unjust for folks whose families gave, that the highest sacrifice, which I think about with specifically with building military families. I'm really hopeful. It's not going to take 20 years, but I
I
think
hope
a
not.
lot, I know. I think a lot about it kind of in this context because it is,
Hmm.
folks from all over who have seen a challenge like you have, encountered it personally, mobilize, put in the work like you're doing, forming an organization, not just going to Congress and saying, this impacted my family and I need this to change. You're pulling data, you're building a community, you're providing them with facts that they can then go and put a budget line item in because
Hmm.
you've given them this data through your survey and the advocacy that you're doing to really back it up. And that's the stuff that gets bills across the finish line, even if it does
Yep.
take, more than once. So we're on the second round here with NTAA. Maybe next year will be it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and we're hoping that we don't have to wait for the NDAA.
Yeah.
So there were two pieces of legislation that were initially introduced into Congress, but then those were included in the NDAA. And so we're hoping, the hope is that, maybe in the new year we can get those standalone bills passed just as, the standalone bills, and we don't have to wait for the NDAA since it did have bipartisan support. We're hoping that we'll be able to get that bipartisan support on those individual pieces of legislation rather than going through Hask and Sask and the committees and the NDAA process. If we have to wait, we'll wait. But there's legislation that's already been introduced that Congress could act on now.
That's really encouraging. I think with this specific need, one thing that's always just blown my mind is, military service in America is very much a family business. We're
Yes.
fourth generation. This is what, we do. This is what our lives are dedicated for. And I think I don't remember what year, but a few years ago, it was like 80% of US service members came from military families. So the fact that our military and veteran community is encountering infertility challenges at higher rates than their civilian counterparts, and that this hasn't been addressed like effectively
It's
is
totally a
mind
retention issue.
blowing.
It's
Yes.
like a retention issue. It's a, future of our
Mhm.
military, because like you're saying, military service members come from military
Yep.
families. But it might skip a generation. Maybe their parents haven't served, but their grandparents have.
Mhm.
And so, yeah,
There's that tie.
there is this family ties, and if we can't create the next generation, who's going to serve our country?
Mhm. Yeah, well, I know it just that's one thing that's just blown my mind for years because I
Hmm.
thought this is like, how is this not a key priority? Like, I mean, you and I have, it's okay, our, personal experiences, emotions, that's
Right.
that list. But like, if you just remove that, just say, we're just looking at the numbers here.
Yeah, looking
Like,
at it strategically and looking at the numbers, yeah, like
yeah,
this, you would think that this would be a no-brainer.
right. That's true. So I know you talked about kind of next stages, don't have to necessarily wait for the next round of NDAA. Are there any other legislative efforts or partnerships or, just your kind of what you're sensing and what you're hearing that gives you hope for, effective solutions being implemented sooner rather than later?
Yeah, we have had a huge outpouring of support
Mhm.
from the broader family building community since the news of the NDAA
Mhm.
has kind of broke. There are several organizations that we've been working with for many years, Resolve being the largest one. Um, we have our support group with them.
Mhm.
We partner with them for their advocacy day, for National Infertility Awareness Week. And those kinds of relationships are just going to strengthen.
Mhm.
Um, More organizations have reached out like, hey, we really want to get behind this. Like the civilian community was pissed,
Yeah.
and rightfully so, because often the military is kind of like the guinea pigs, if you will,
Mhm.
for broader legislation. A lot of times when um, there is a lawmaker with, an idea or an agenda, they test it out on the military. Like, okay, is this
Mhm.
feasible? Does this cost the American taxpayers a lot of money? And so we're kind of the guinea pigs.
Mhm.
Like, and, on this, we don't necessarily have to be the guinea pigs because, Congress already has this, federal employees already have this coverage.
Mhm.
That makes a lot more sense. But we would be the guinea pigs for, kind of a federal mandate, overall healthcare changes, um, if it were to be successful in the military. So we are hopeful,
Mhm.
on things that are kind of on the horizon, how frustrated the civilian community has been with
Mhm.
this NDAA process, and that it had the support, but still didn't make the final cut.
Mhm.
Um, and so we're hopeful with that. We're hopeful, that people are starting to understand the barriers and the challenges that all military families face when it comes to family building.
Mhm.
But so yeah, so we're hopeful. We're excited about some, potential new partnerships and
Mhm.
collaborations in the new year with people that are just as angry and upset about this
Mhm.
as we are.
Well, advocacy is truly a team sport. So
Yes,
it's
I'm always saying stronger together.
oh, it sounds like you're building a very, very strong network, kind of a true coalition to tackle this.
Yes.
So what's next for building military families network? So I know you've got the survey out.
Mhm.
Are there any upcoming programs or initiatives that you're, super excited about or can share?
Yeah, so we've got a couple of new exciting things planned for the new year. Nothing that I can really talk about just yet. Our survey, kind of is like the biggest thing between now and January 15th. We need people to take the 20 minutes to complete the
Mhm.
survey, because that 20 minutes could give us the data and the stories that we need to push this across the finish line. And it's not just people that are experiencing infertility or
Mhm.
pregnancy loss or that have pursued adoption or surrogacy. It's, every military, couple that's tried to build their family and had deployment or a TDY or a PCS or insert whatever, like,
Mhm.
career, position, that they couldn't get pregnant for, whatever. Those are the stories we need because that that is what Congress needs to hear.
Mhm.
Um, we also are hoping in the new year as we get additional support group hosts that come in and join our team as volunteers. We're hoping to offer some new support groups as well on some new topics because we currently only have our infertility groups, our pregnancy and infant loss group, and our pregnancy after. So
Mhm.
we're hoping to expand into a couple of other categories as well for family building. So that's kind of on the horizon as well. And then this spring, we're going to launch our comprehensive report for the survey.
Well, that's super exciting.
Yes, it
Got a
keeps
lot of
us
irons
busy.
in the fire. Yeah.
Yes. And, and we're always adding to our education and our resource
Mhm.
library. If you haven't checked out our website in a while, check back, because every so often we're able to get in there and add some more content and resources. So if we don't have what you're looking for just yet, check back, maybe we will. And if you know of a resource that we should have on our website, by all means, please tell us.
So how can listeners get involved with y'all? Whether they're military connected or want to support the mission. What's a good way to plug in?
Yeah, so visiting our website, buildingmilitaryfamiliesnetwork.org, we have ways that people can support us on there. We have a couple of different collaborations and ways that individuals or organizations can support us. We're always looking for volunteers. We have a variety of roles, and as we continue to grow, we're going to continue to need to grow our team as well. Um, and then, help us by being a beacon of hope and sharing our organization because chances are somebody um, maybe sitting right next to you that is silently struggling and just sharing a post or keeping us in your back pocket to share if somebody were to open up about their struggles, you would have something to share with them.
Well, thank you so much, Julie, for coming on and sharing your story and kind of being that beacon of hope in a challenge that I know so many in our military and veteran community are facing today. It's been really encouraging to talk with you, and your passion and your true tenacity with this just really shines through. So I really appreciate all that you do in this space. You're really on the front lines trailblazing in a challenge that a lot of people knew was going on and no one was willing to step up to the plate. So thank you for doing that.
Oh, it's the honor of a lifetime. And I'm so glad that I had that courage to step forth and build this because every time I hear um, things like that, from people like you, Hannah, like it fuels our team to know the impact that we're having.
Well, I know it's not easy to bootstrap a nonprofit. So
Yes.
kudos to you for just jumping in the deep end and just taking it as it comes. So
Yeah.
to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to this episode of Tipping Spears with Hannah Becker. We hope this conversation has sparked new ideas and challenged the way you think about our future. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, and we'll catch you next time with another exciting guest.